Hello, everyone, again, and welcome. Again, my name is Laura Schmiegel. I'm the SVP of Strategic Partnerships at Orion Talent, and I'll be your moderator today. Before you start, I can tell you exactly who I am in the Orion Talent universe. I was brought on to be a facilitator of strategic partnerships to help Orion expand our military search and our RPO search and our diversity search by leveraging government and nonprofit relationships. I come from Booz Allen Hamilton, where I was the head of military and veteran affairs and led some major partnerships there with military organizations, as well as with the government in terms of military recruiting. And before that, I was in the military nonprofit space. I started the military spouse program at Hiring Our Heroes and was a co-founder of a nonprofit called Blue Star Families that provides support and connections to military families globally. But that is enough about me. I would love to turn very quickly to our amazing panel today. First, we have Sakita Douglas, who's the Chief Talent Officer for Harris County. That is a big talent job for one of our country's biggest counties in Texas. Sakita, I'm thrilled to have you here to offer your vast experience and insights. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and your role and your work, as well as your history?
Sure, absolutely. Laura, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to discuss this topic. I am the Chief Talent Officer, as you stated, for Harris County. For context, Harris County is the third largest county in the United States. Geographically speaking, Harris County is larger than 26 US states. To give you an idea of the size, that's 4.5 million residents that are our tax base. I have spent my entire career in human resources. I fell into human resources at 19 years old. My mother is still waiting for me to go to medical school, by the way, just so you know. But to that end, I have spent the vast majority of my career, certainly nearly the last 20 years, leading very large, complex HR transformations and reorgs in a variety, primarily in the private sector. In fact, Harris County is my first entree into the public sector. And so how that has shown up has been lots of mergers, acquisitions, startups, spinoffs, a lot of work with private equity-backed firms. And so Harris County is simply my next challenge.
That is awesome. Texas is extremely large, you're reminding me. So congratulations on the job, and we welcome you. And our second panelist is Allison Joyce, who's the Vice President Talent Partner for Walmart. Again, another big job with a huge workforce. Allison, it's so good to have you as well. Can you also share your bio and a little bit of what got you interested in working in the talent and HR industry?
Sure. Thank you, Laura. And again, a pleasure to be here with you and Sakita. And I'm really keen to have this conversation today. So as you mentioned, I work for Walmart. So Fortune 1, my responsibility is to support 1.6 million associates in the United States as part of the Walmart US organization. The Walmart US organization is about $335 billion in revenue per year. So it's just an amazing organization and frankly, amazing in the communities in which it serves. So it really serves multiple purposes, not only as a major retailer and grocer, but a real connection in the communities that we serve and with our employees. I also sort of fell into HR. I don't know that I really even knew what HR was, but got the opportunity early in my career to start with PepsiCo and spent a long time with PepsiCo and then Yum Brands, which was a spinoff of PepsiCo, and really just continued to fall in love with being a part of the HR organization, being a part of the business, and yet balanced and focused on people. And that's what's really kept me in this space. I did do a stint as a stay-home mom for 5 years in between Yum Brands and then Comcast, and then ultimately had the opportunity to lead all of talent for Comcast for the past 10 years. And I just joined Walmart about 100 days ago, so very new to my role.
Wow, thank you. Well, I think it's clear to everyone listening that we are going to have a wealth of experience to draw from our panel, both professionally and personally, because Allison and Sakita have a personal stake in today's topic as well, having just moved to a new job in the past couple of years. But we will get to that in just a minute. The first thing I would like to do is tell you how you can participate as part of the audience, because we want a very interactive session. It's what makes this good. If you have a question, we will have a Q&A period at the end, but you do not have to wait for it at the end of the panel discussion. You can add your questions to the chat at any time. We'll monitor them and do one of two things. Either we'll save them, table them, and put them in the Q&A session and hopefully get to them then. Or if it's pertinent to the conversation and seems like something that would be a great follow-up for one of our panelists or something we want to dig into a little bit more, we'll ask it in real time. So anytime you have a question, just ask away. The second interactive aspect of our conversation today will be poll questions, instant poll questions. So we'll interrupt our conversation occasionally to see what you think and what your experience has been with the Great Resignation. So when you see those pop up, please participate and we'll get some reactions from our panel on the results. So without further ado, I think we can move into our topic. I'll spend a couple of minutes sort of setting the scene so our panel can get into some conversations about some of these numbers I'm going to share. In the last 2 years, over the course of this pandemic, we've seen an exodus of women, as you can see by this slide. Most of us have seen evidence in our own workplaces and among our colleagues and friends and peers, anecdotal evidence of people leaving their jobs and going to a new one. But here is the data that's proof that these are not just stories from amongst our friends and colleagues. Since February 2020, US women have lost more than 5.4 million jobs compared to 4.4 million lost by men. Those jobs have not been recouped by women. They are not re-entering the workforce in the same rates that men are. More than 1 million men have rejoined the labor force since the start of the pandemic, compared to just 39,000 women. So men have recouped their losses while 1.1 million women remain out of the labor force. Those are some big numbers. So when we talk about the Great Resignation, we're really talking about women. Men found new jobs and are coming back. Women are gone, and for one reason or another, they're struggling to come back or choosing not to come back. It's very important to note, as often is the case with stories like this and big numbers like this, it's not a new story. Labor force participation among women has been steadily declining since the Great Recession of 2008. The pandemic just kind of put it into hyperdrive. We also have to recognize that motherhood plays a big role for women, and it always has. So going back even before 2008, it's often difficult for women who choose to stay home with their children to continue the same career trajectory that their counterparts and colleagues who don't have children have. 1/3 of all mothers in the pandemic scaled back or left their careers to take care of their children. So as we think about the impact for employers and for us as talent leaders, we have to think about the impact that the pandemic has had on those women's lives. Their earnings and their career trajectories have been stunted. And we are in search of solutions collectively as a talent community. So that's the big data picture of the Great Resignation. And now what we'd like to do is take a close-up look at that story through the experience of the business leaders on our panel. So my first question to both of you, Sakita and Allison, did you also see a pattern in your organizations that reflects the data I just shared? In other words, have more women left your organizations than men? Have more men come back? Do you have any insights about why they may have left your organization? Sakita, can I start with you?
Sure, that'd be great. So when the global pandemic initially hit, if you will, or kind of just hit the world in approximately March of 2020, I was working for a global oil and gas firm. And the very first wave of individuals who ended up leaving the workforce were women. And at that time, it was more so in response to what was going on in schools, right? Because also schools were there was a need to parent as well as other responsibilities. And so within that oil and gas space, we initially saw women leaving in an effort to support largely their children. And also there were some who were caring for elderly parents or other dependents. And so that was that first wave, which is I need to be able as a woman to be able to better support my children, becoming their at-home educational resource in the absence of in-person education. Men followed, but not nearly, at least in oil and gas, not even remotely close to the numbers for women that exited. And then as the pandemic continued to linger and became more serious and the numbers increased, there were, again, additional layers of complexity around women were leaving, right? And so there was safety, there was school to think about. There was also, candidly, a great deal of burnout. If we just want to be honest about it, just burning the candle at both ends, trying to work, trying to take care of your family, all of the implications of the pandemic in terms of your physical safety, mental health burnout, emotional burnout. A lot of women just chose to do something different. And I've been a part of a number of conversations over the course since March of 2020 in terms of the reasons women have left. And many of them were like, I was just burned out. I needed something different. My children needed me. My parents needed me. All of a sudden, my job or my career was no longer the priority, and I had to consider something different.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And the fact that we all made a career switch during the pandemic, I think is telling too, right? We're all kind of looking, including yourself. You chose to switch careers. And I think we should talk about that too, our own personal experiences and why we made the switch, because it's probably very representative of a lot of people in our audience and a lot of the women you're talking about.
Yeah. For me, again, oil and gas, I think everyone is well aware of how the economic implications to oil and gas that the global pandemic created. And so I was in an organization that prior to COVID was thriving and looking to identify several acquisitions within a 36-month period. And truly, the bottom fell out, candidly, and had to restructure and is in the process of being acquired by a competitor as we speak. And so that is part of what led to my departure. And in the interim, as I sought my next opportunity, I consulted for a number of organizations. And it was also an opportunity for me to really think about what did I want next professionally. Some of the priorities for me was a degree of work-life balance. I haven't always been good at creating my own balance, but I think the pandemic in general just created a pressure type situation that having a degree of balance was important. I think also for me is being in an organization that really was committed to people-centric ideas and philosophies, and understanding that the way that we engage, the way that we retain, certainly job titles and job descriptions and compensation are important, but they're not necessarily the reasons that motivate individuals to join an organization. And so I wanted to be a part of an organization that was committed to thinking differently about how we attract talent, how we keep people, and being creative in terms of the ways that we retain. And so looking at remote or hybrid work, looking at alternatives to commuting an hour each way in a Houston, Texas, right, where hour-long commutes are real, and being able to validate that and quantify that, not only in terms of savings and costs operationally, but also to employee experience and to employee engagement, and receiving that feedback directly. And so I was fortunate enough to be approached with this opportunity. And we have a lot of work to do, but it really is around creating a better environment to engage and retain folks, and especially women.
Women are not historically good at maintaining work-life balance. That is an understatement, probably.
Yes. Definitely.
Allison, what about you? What did you see in your career before and during the pandemic, and even now, about the reasons why women left and why they may not come back?
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating to hear Sakita's experience. I happen to be working in the technology sector. And while initially there were some layoffs and we were all, like everyone, kind of uncertain about the implications of COVID, very quickly there was a surge in demand for the services of the company that I worked for, because we were supporting a massive broadband network. And so, it was not uncommon. We were working 18, 20 hours a day to try to figure out how to support the surge and support the employees. So we had a different sort of company experience. My personal observation, and this was interesting. I think, yes, we saw layoffs. In my experience, it was women and men. But what I think is interesting about my observation and my own personal experience, once we sort of got through the scary part of the pandemic and we started to sort of settle in, I recognized that I had outsourced most of my life pre-pandemic. So as a mom of two children, I was using Uber to get my kids to their activities at times. I was using Instacart. I was, I completely had cleaners. I had all of these services that I was using to basically outsource being a mom and being, a head of household. And so it was really interesting to me to settle into being home and to start to cook again and to actually find joy in cooking and find joy in some of these things that I had been outsourcing. And I know from my own personal experience, that wasn't just unique to me. I think there were a lot of women that sort of went, wait a minute, actually, I'm enjoying this. And I maybe saw this as a chore pre-pandemic. And so I just think, I think that's been an awakening. And I think in some cases, maybe a reckoning now that we start to look at, to Sakita's point, sort of rebalancing, maybe for the first time, work and life and saying, hold on, I think there may be other ways to be at work and to contribute, but maybe it won't take over my whole life where I have to outsource everything that I've actually come to enjoy some aspects of it. So I think that's been an interesting perspective I've seen.
It's interesting. I cooked just really badly before the pandemic. I'd like to say I improved a little bit. You'd have to ask my husband and my kids. But what's really interesting to me listening to this is something that I didn't share, but most people probably can intimate from my introduction, is that I was a military spouse for 20 years. And my husband at the time was in the infantry, and we did 3 combat deployments and moved 9 times over a 20-year military career. And it just strikes me that a lot of the tensions and burdens of the pandemic are really kind of a broad scale reflection of the kinds of things that I saw military spouses experience, what I myself experienced over time. I was a lawyer, and you have to take a bar exam every time you move somewhere. And we moved 4 different places, and I was trying to keep up, and I took and passed 4 bar exams, and I still had a problem getting a job. Our schedule was always unpredictable because my husband was either deploying or training, or unexpected moves would come up with no notice. And it's just very hard to maintain a career, let alone all the rest of your life while all that chaos is going on. And I think that's kind of what we all experienced in a very different way in the last 2 years. And I've seen military spouses take both, like the bookends that you described, take both tacks too, either diving into their career and outsourcing things they love and missing out on friendships and family, or bowing out of the workforce altogether, and sometimes very gratefully and graciously, and sometimes not wanting to and regretting that they did it. So to me, this is a really salient conversation, and I love that we're having it. And I love that we're giving all women an opportunity to rethink it and maybe think of better ways, and employers to think of better ways. So I'm really excited to dive in even further. So I think what we'll do is go to our first poll right now. Our first poll question for the audience, you should see this pop up soon. What should businesses do to bring women back? We're going to start by focusing on the business. I'm sorry, that's the next question. The first poll question is, what are the top 3 reasons women in your organizations have given for leaving? It's multiple choice. You can pick up to 3. We would love to hear from you to see if you've had different experiences than what we've described. Okay. Looks like what we have for the top answers are wanting to keep or find remote work, childcare, which is always a big one, and currently unhappy with their employer, or they had a new job offer. I think that tracks with all of the things that I've seen. And I don't know, Allison, Sakita, do any of these jump out to you? Are there any surprises in that?
I'm not surprised at all around remote work. And I think in so many instances, we've now done this very successfully for 2 years. And so to think that there are still places where people don't want to support remote work or think there are challenges to it, and there's value in being together. I totally get that. But I think we have to rethink work.
Absolutely. I expected remote work to be at the top of this poll. And certainly, I am sensitive and aware that in certain roles, certainly working for Harris County, we're open 24 hours, right? And so every service you could think of, including law enforcement, some opportunities and some roles are not able to be remote, but there are lots of opportunities for hybrid work. There are opportunities for remote work. I agree with Allison. We've successfully done this over the course of 2 years. And I think most organizations, no matter where they may be today, have all had to pivot in some form or fashion to allow for the continuity of their day-to-day operations by modifying how they think about remote work and hybrid work. In addition to that, I think just thinking about looking at childcare as well, which is we have to think about family leave policies in a bigger, broader, more comprehensive way. And so I really believe that, and I've said this often, which is I think one of the benefits, certainly the pandemic is not a good thing, but I do believe one of the outcomes of the pandemic is forcing organizations and employers to really look at the workforce, the work that they deliver, and how it is done operationally. It has forced organizations to look at it and think about it differently. And I think there have been a lot of creative solutions that have been identified. I also think there's a huge opportunity for more creative solutions in terms of how you deliver work and create careers and create engagement with employees.
Yep. That is the perfect segue to our next question for the two of you, which is in the midst of all these conversations about return to work or not return to work or hybrid work. What, in your opinion, are some of the things that businesses can do to help lure some of those women back into the workforce, to bring them in and make them feel like they can have a life and balance things and be productive and enjoy their jobs? Allison, let's start with you this time.
Sure. And I think there's sort of two pieces to this. I think on the professional side, for people who traditionally work in offices or those types of environments, I think the first thing we have to do is sort of rethink the idea of turning offices into everything. In my experiences, offices had become sort of a one-stop shop. My dry cleaning was delivered to the back of my door, right? There were yoga classes and incredible meals. And it was just sort of, hey, you could be here 24/7, right? The only thing we didn't have was a cot in our office. And so it was wonderful convenience. And I think it was a great experience. But I do think we have to rethink that. And I think, to my comment earlier, attracting and retaining talent for a long time was sort of this competition, again, around how you could make your office this amazing destination. And I think over the past 2 years or so, I think particularly for women, we're saying, you know what, working from home, I can get to the dry cleaners before it closes at 6:00, right? It's okay. And my dry cleaning bill is about 1/10 of what it was when I was working in the office. So I just think, again, there's a reset here. And I think what's an opportunity and a challenge for businesses and who have offices is to articulate what's the value in being in office, right? What's the value in driving 45 minutes and being here and being together? And I know we all get that there's real value there. But I think businesses in particular have to really articulate that and be clear about it. And sort of the days of saying, hey, I just want to be sure you're here, that I can see you from 8:00 until 5:00, and you need to be sitting here. I just think, people are very skeptical about feeling or putting themselves in that kind of environment. And this balance of sort of life and work being much more aligned over the past couple of years. And again, we have 2 years of experience of doing this. Nobody would have ever signed up for it, but we've done it now. And so how can we allow and sort of build through this experience to make our workplace and our home places work better. And I think there's a lot of technology. There are a lot of things that we can continue to do, I think, to Sakita's point, to really continue to explore this and not sort of have this knee-jerk reaction of saying, okay, well, COVID is lessening, let's get back in the office, and, you know, sort of resist that temptation, because I think there's no going back. I think it's how we go forward and how we continue to be virtual. And the one thing I'd offer, and Sakita is exactly right, many businesses, including the one that I support now, are almost 24/7, right? We've had people on the ground or in trucks or servicing customers throughout the pandemic, and many employees who've been very committed to doing so. And I think they'll continue to need to be those types of services and environments where people are there. And I think it's a different conversation for those folks, right? How do we continue to create flexible schedules? How do we continue to create services and support? Because those work environments haven't changed much. And so what else can we do there?
Right. Yeah, I think that was really interesting and insightful, Sakita, that you instantly kind of bifurcated that. We do have people that have to be on site at least some of the time. So can we pick your brain for some of those creative ideas for how to help those people maybe get a more flexible life?
Sure, absolutely. So I have to just acknowledge something that Allison said, which I think is a challenge for a lot of organizations, not all, but this idea that someone needs to be physically sitting in an office to be productive. And that's a cultural thing that we've got to address and acknowledge that exists. I do think 2 years into the pandemic, it's getting better, but it is still, for many organizations, a bottleneck in terms of being creative when you think about the workforce and the opportunities to create a degree of flexibility. And so, Allison, I think I could not agree with you more. I think for folks who do have careers that require them to be on site or work non-traditional hours, some of the same creative thinking applies, which is what does flexibility look like even in that role, right? What does it look like? What do our policies around family and medical leave and support for working women with families or taking care of elderly? Like, it's still the same conversation with context around those who have careers and disciplines that perhaps don't allow for remote work in the way that someone that's in a, what I would call a corporate role, right? It's probably it's more complex, but I think the work is still the same. It absolutely is the same to figure that out. And I would just add as well, which is as we think about bringing women back, which is women are motivated candidly by the same things that men are, with considerations for their responsibilities to their families. Women want growth and opportunity. They want career pathing. They want a way to create impact in their roles. And so I think it's important to remind leaders and stakeholders and at all levels, which is what they want isn't always one or the other. It is, how can I have both in a way that supports my professional life as well as ensures that my family is supported as well. And so it is also, to Allison's, again, I'll repeat what Allison said, which also is, here we are 2 years into the pandemic, and while we've made most organizations have made some type of concession around remote work, that's what we've done over the course of the next 2 years. What does it look like moving forward in this constant iteration of what remote work looks like? We do it operationally within organizations. We're constantly assessing our strategy and our plan and our priorities. We should also be doing that proactively as we think about the workforce and the people who work, and what are the opportunities for the next iteration of hybrid work.
I love that. And I love that both of you pointed out that because you're an employer of people who have to be on site somewhere, it doesn't let you off the hook. There are things we can do. So let's crowdsource this one. Let's do our next poll question. Audience, our second poll question for you is, what in your opinion is the most important thing that your business could do to recruit, hire, and retain more women? What are those creative solutions we can do to help give women more incentives to come back? I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Okay, it looks like our number one answer is flexible schedules. Second is remote work, actually. And it looks like neck and neck after that is paid family leave and formal training and career development. So, Allison and Sakita, we discussed remote work and flexible schedules a little bit. Can we talk about paid family leave and how we deal with family leave generally for women and men, and how businesses can approach that if you don't have a lot of options?
So, paid family leave, I think is a particular topic that from an HR perspective, most organizations are having to look at. And in certain states, obviously, there are some states that have some statewide policies and legislation to drive that. But candidly, I think, again, this is an opportunity to think of paid family leave differently. And I just want to make a point, and I, have lots of peers in this HR space and work with a lot of leaders, which are, we have to, I want to be clear, it is not optional to not consider all of the opportunities to identify, recruit, engage, and retain great talent. And part of that conversation has to be paid family leave. I am in a state that doesn't have really any requirements legislatively around paid family leave. And while I think that could be better, the reality of the matter is that it is so inconsistent across employers within the state of Texas. And I think there's an opportunity to do better there. I would challenge you that a paid family leave benefit directly impacts retention. And so we cannot, it's a one-sided conversation if we're not including every aspect that impacts or drives turnover. Paid family leave is a priority. And I think there are ways to be creative in that, certainly as well.
Allison?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to Sakita's point is just any company really needs to look at all of the options. In 2021, it was the first time in the United States there were more jobs than people. And so, if companies cannot continue to be competitive, individuals will go and find the places that are. I mean, this is a simple sort of economic discussion, and people are usually pretty clued in to finding places and companies to work that they feel like are supporting them and their needs as an individual. And so companies that are willing and respectful to look at the total spectrum of what they're offering and how they're offering it, and are people aware of it, and is it available, I think becomes really critical in their ability to attract and retain employees. And again, women or men or anyone, there are more jobs than people. And so, whether they're willing to yet, I think certainly over the next couple of years, it will become almost a requirement or an expectation as people find those places that are offering many of these things that people are talking about. Flexible schedules, I'm not surprised that's first, right? Because I do think a lot of these are linked. And it's again about people trying to live their life, support their family, keep a roof over their head, and find some meaningful work. And to be able to do that without making trade-offs, I think is the goal a lot of people share.
Yeah. Amen. And I think you're right. There's a war for talent right now. And so I think it was correct for us to start with what businesses are going to have to do in order to get more women back in the workforce and sort of meet them halfway. But that's only halfway. So the next question I'm going to direct to you is from the other side. What should women do to get where they want to go? What do they need to do, and what do they need to ask for? And what do they need to keep asking for as things kind of get back to whatever normal is going to be in order to get everything they need and want from a workplace? Allison, let's start with you again.
Yeah, I love your question, Laura. And I think the key piece of this is, what do we ask for? Because I think a lot of times we sort of think about, what should we be asking for from the employer? And that's an important question. But I think the more important question is, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to invest in or take a chance on or take a risk for? I mean, there are a lot of questions that I think are important that we have to ask ourselves as individuals. And I have found in my own career and as a talent person over many years, willing is a really important question, because we tend to focus on what are we capable, or what is someone capable of doing, or again, what's the company going to do, but what's the individual actually willing to do? And so I think for people that aspire to the C-suite or aspire to be in very senior executive positions, those become lifestyle jobs, right? And so you've got to be willing to pursue a lot of the expectations that come with those types of big jobs. In other instances, I think women have a unique opportunity now in this conversation to say, hey, I'm not willing to do, 16-hour days, but how can I best use my skills, my unique skills and resources, and where can I find a space to do that? And I think, again, through technology, there are a lot of really cool tech sites and other ways that you can find gig work and remote work, and there are lots of options. So I do think there's just, again, I used the word earlier, a bit of an awakening, I think, for women to realize that we can drive more of what it is we want and need in our lives. And maybe it means we don't work for a big company, or maybe it means we make trade-offs, but we're in a position to make the trade-offs that we're willing to make. And I just think that's a different position than maybe we were in even 3 or 4 years ago, where we probably all felt like we needed to have to do something, et cetera. So I just think the balance has changed a little bit. And the last thing I'll say is I think men are really important in this dialogue too. And as we think about attracting women back to the workforce, supporting women and meeting them where they are in terms of their need for flexibility or their willingness to have a career that might look horizontal rather than vertical, men are going to be incredibly important on this journey. They always have been, and they will continue to need to be strong supporters and very engaged in this conversation, and real sponsors of some of these changes, both to how we work as well as being attractive to women. So I think willingness is a really important part of this conversation.
Yeah, I like that term, willingness. Sakita, what do you think about this question?
So, one word comes to mind. I say this often. I feel like I'm a broken record, which is having a degree of intentionality and a degree of clarity around what you want to do is essential. It is absolutely essential. And often, not always, but often some of the women that I come into contact with, and again, I think going to Allison's point is we've never, the question is, what are you willing to do? What do you want to do? And very often that's not the place we're coming from. We're coming from a place in some instances of need, right? In a scarcity mindset. And so taking a pause to get really, really clear and leading your career with a degree of intentionality, and I would even say with a plan, is incredibly important. And that's for women and men. But it seems that I find that very often men are very specific what they want to do. And women tend to be a little bit more, not all women, but a little bit more kind of all of, well, I could do this, or I could do this, or I could work here. I could work for a Fortune 1, I could work for a small nonprofit. And so I would say getting clear on what you want and being intentional about your career and the work that you want to do is the first step, quite honestly. And the benefit of the Great Resignation is there are lots of options. There are lots of opportunities for talented folks. And the first step would be to get really clear on the work that you want to be involved in and be incredibly focused on moving in that direction and having a really thoughtful plan for your career, taking into considerations all of the things that are important to you, both personally as well as professionally. Because there are, to Allison's point, there are more jobs than there are people. There are a plethora of opportunities. How you get to where you want to go is knowing that to begin with, and instead of reacting, but really being proactive in that approach.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think also being clear with yourself what clarity and intentionality means for women is important too. I've probably counseled thousands of military spouses over the years. And what I always used to tell them is your career trajectory is not going to look like what you thought when you graduated from college with all your dreams and hopes and plans. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't be planning for something rather than just taking a job anywhere the Army sends you, in my case. If you can't plan what your career is going to look like because you don't know where you're going to live and you don't know if the next logical opportunity is going to be there for you, at least think about what you want ultimately out of your life, right? Do you want to just make a lot of money and it doesn't matter to you what your title is or where you work? Do you want a big office and a title? Do you want to be customer facing forever? Are you more of a solo act? Like, think about that level of intentionality. And then anytime you have an opportunity, grab the opportunity that builds one of the skills you need to get there, right? So I think you're absolutely right. And women should think about what they ultimately want. Do they want to lean in at a certain point in their life? What's that golden prize? It may not look exactly like what they thought, but what does it kind of look like in the haze, and pull some things out of it as you go, right? Yeah.
And can I add to that, Laura?
Yes.
These are conversations I have I kid you not, I just had a conversation with a woman day before yesterday on Tuesday along the same lines of this topic. And my response again was, requires a degree of intentionality and planning. And she goes, well, I don't know what I want to do. And so my response to her is then start with your life, right? Because at the end of the day, your career, your job, and the work that you do should ultimately support what you want in your life. And so I would say to any woman, if you're not exactly sure where you want to be or what you want to do, what do you want your life to look like? And how does the work that you do professionally support that? That's a great way to kind of reverse engineer that. Yep. But it's a great starting point. And I would also add to that, which is don't try and figure out the rest of your career. That's also unrealistic. Is what does the next, 12 to 24 months look like for you? What are the things you're wanting to accomplish? How should your career support your children and family and your personal interest? And so don't overcomplicate it, because sometimes I think as women we're thinking 10 years ahead, and that sounds great, but operationalizing that is unrealistic, right? So
right. That's right. That's great. And it's funny listening to you. It occurs to me that this conversation is a great setup for the last question for everyone. What valuable lesson did you learn from your great resignation job move? As I mentioned in the front of the session, we've all changed jobs over this. I think I've already answered that with my last question. When you can't plan, you kind of have to just be opportunistic in a planful way, and that's the advice I give people all the time. But what advice, what lessons have you learned that you could give to somebody who's going through this? Sakita?
I think for me is one, as I stated earlier, is I think the pandemic certainly. I am 10 months. I don't know if I said that, but I am 10 months into my role. And so I was, like you, made a move during the pandemic. The one thing I was really, really clear on was I needed a place where I would have be able to create a degree of balance, because I'm not good at it, candidly. And there are days, candidly, and this is more me than it is the organization I work for. There are days certainly where the candle is burned at both ends, but I'm very clear around understanding my runway and when I need a mental health day, when I need to feel the sun on my face and go take my book and sit in the park, like what I need to recharge, and having not only the environment, but also the leadership that I work with to support that. And I encourage my team all the time, like, you should go take a walk. Right? You should take a day off, And so not just for myself, but really mirroring it and trying to set an example. So that was a priority for me, which is I just needed to be in a place that if I said to my boss, I need 2 days because I've been working, 13-hour days, I need 2 days, that he would support that and understand that. And I'm fortunate that has happened. In addition to that, even in the work that I lead, growth and impact are incredibly important to me. And so as I took this opportunity, I am always interested in making an impact. I want to be able to come to an organization and see and measure the results of my work, not only in terms of the people that are here, but what does it look like 2 or 3 generations down the road, and be a part of something really unique and special. And so that was a priority for me. But that goes back to my prior point of being really specific and intentional about what you want. And so that kind of led me to my change and shift, and I'm pretty excited about where we're at.
Me too, and I'm excited for the people of Harris County, quite frankly, after talking to you today. So thank you. Allison, I'm going to give you the last word on this. What valuable lessons have you taken away from the pandemic, and how are you going to apply them?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's 2 things. One, I think like Sakita, making a job move in the middle of the pandemic was an incredible opportunity to think about what's important to me. And, I had been somewhere for 10 years, so I'd really felt like I had been super invested there, loved the people, but just for me, when I looked at what was next, I wanted an organization that was going to be big enough to give me a lot of things and a lot of places to try. And hopefully get support to do some, I don't need to go vertical, but I wanted a lot of places where I could sort of move horizontally. And I wanted a group of people that I could really respect and learn from, and a company that I knew was doing good work in their communities. And so that actually was a new thing for me. I mean, I had not made career decisions prior to this one around thinking about what impact are we having on our communities that we serve. And so that really became something that became important to me. And so I found a place that met all of those, as well as my personal need to work from home for a couple more years before my kids leave school. I think the second thing that I learned from this, and I found this really interesting, I had so many peers and colleagues call me and say, I can't believe you're making a move. That just sounds exhausting. And so I thought that was so enlightening in terms of how people are feeling. And I think to the point of this conversation, there's so many people sort of burn out and just exhausted from the last couple of years. I was really surprised that that was people's reaction to thinking about making a career move. And again, I just think that was really insightful. And I've thought about that every day, like what prompted me. I'm certainly exhausted too from COVID and being home. But at the same time, I think to the point of our conversation, I took the time and continue to take the time to try to be really clear about what's going to make life worth living and getting up every day, and how am I spending my time, and how am I contributing my unique skills. And so that was really a part of my decision making. But a lot of lessons, I think, from these moves.
I think that's a perfect place to end. That's how we should all be thinking. So thank you so much for that. We are going to do some Q&A, but before we get to that, there's a few key takeaways we want to always finish up with. One, go back and share this data with your leadership to support and spark action within your own company if you can. This is mostly a women-affected pandemic. And so it's important to have these conversations with everyone you can about how to bring women back into the workforce. And data is always a great help when you're having those kinds of conversations. Second, if you're in a position, ask the women in your company or the women who you're hiring what they want and what they need. Listen to them. And you'll probably hear some of the same themes that we saw in our poll today. These things aren't mysteries. We know what's important to help women get work-life balance. And I think it's important to get creative and try to help them if we really want them back. And lastly, retain flexibility wherever you can. I think all of us who are women out here appreciate our current employers and the flexibility we get from either working at home, from a flexible schedule, from patience with us if we need a little time. So I think the more employers can show that they're being flexible and trying to accommodate women's needs, I think the more you'll get from your workforce of women. So thank you so much, Sakita and Allison. Please stick around. I believe we have a few questions. Megan, the voice of God here in our podcast, is going to take some questions from the audience, and please answer as you will.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate that. I like that title. That's good. So one of the questions that we received a lot, and I saw some chatter about this in the chat box too, is that something that has resonated with people that we've talked about is really the benefits of remote work on either a hybrid model versus a full-time in-office employment. So that's something that people seem to be really interested in. And a couple of the questions that I wanted to share to see if anyone has some feedback on. One person asked, how can companies support women who work for companies who don't offer remote work or flexible schedules? And then the other one was, how do you convince your business leaders that they don't have to control everyone? Traditional executive group feels that everyone should be in the office, but why?
Great questions. I'll offer my perspectives. I think I know that hybrid work and remote work and flexible schedules are really operational considerations. And so what I would recommend, if you work in an organization that is resistant, or perhaps does not understand fully the benefit of remote work or a hybrid work schedule, is I would encourage you to work very closely with your HR team to state a business case, candidly, offer up a pilot, if you will, because that's another thing, which is these changes don't typically happen with the flip of a switch, right? This is a cultural shift for your organization. And so I would encourage you to work really closely with your HR leader around stating a business case, a very thoughtful business case, and proposing a pilot. That's a great starting point. It's also will help you to be engaged in this conversation. That is definitely there as well. And this is assuming that your role and your responsibility is able to be done remotely. And so a big piece of that answering for the business will be, how will you measure your success, right? What are the savings or the cost implications for the organization, which is why I think a business case is the right first step. And then last but not least, I would also look for organizations in your same vertical or industry or discipline that could be models and baselines for establishing or mirroring a remote or hybrid work model as well. So that would be how I would start, especially if there's some resistance. If you're dealing with some resistance or a lack of understanding, I would start there and approach it from a business case perspective.
Yeah.
I think it's a great, and what I would offer in addition to that is, this is also about competition for talent. And so I think to Sakita's point, if you find that your competitors for your business are offering, opportunities or more flexibility or more money or, whatever it is, I mean, just being clear about monitoring the competition and monitoring your local markets and bringing that information forward. I saw a comment in the chat, what if your HR person's not aligned? HR people, a lot of times they're going to support the business. And so I think that first piece around using data, being smart about who you're competing for talent, even if you don't hire a lot of people, you have to retain people and you want people to stay with your organization. So being smart about really monitoring the market. And there's ways to bring that information forward as part of a pilot, to Sakita's point, or part of hey, we've got a small team and we wanted to monitor the market and we want to serve up this information because we think it's important, right? What are the ways that you can share information in a non-threatening way? And then I think, the second piece, and I think it's an important question that we have to think about in this conversation, is what's been missing, right? Because with executives at a couple of different companies I've had the opportunity to talk with, there's a sense of, yes, look at what we accomplished, but we don't even know what we've been missing because we've not been in the office, and we miss the hallway conversations and sort of the spark of that connection and the spark of those relationships, and really thinking through, and I think talking with your business leaders to understand what is it they feel like is missing. And then how can we find ways to solve that, right? If we feel like we're missing innovation or we're missing that spark of connection, how can you solution around that? How can technology play a role in that? How can, finding one day a month where you're really purposeful around innovation? I'm making this up, but there's lots of ways I think you can brainstorm around really getting at what do they feel like is missing by offering flexibility or remote work. And I think solution it just like you would anything else.
Laura, one more question we had to kind of piggyback off of the remote work. Somebody asked if you guys have seen any instances of discrimination in remote work, for instance, men being given more opportunity for remote work versus women.
Sakina and Allison, looking forward to your answers to this one too, but I'll wait till you're done.
I have not personally seen that in the two organizations I've worked for during the global pandemic. I think it's been far easier for organizations to pivot folks who are in corporate roles to remote work, regardless of gender. But no, I have not necessarily. I am unaware, even among my network, of that being an issue.
And same, I haven't experienced it and haven't seen it, and it hasn't come up, which I think is really good. It's a great question, and I hadn't even considered had we seen differences. And I think for at least the panelists, I think the answer is no, we haven't, which is good. And I think, again, I know a lot of men who also want flexibility and remote working for lots of reasons. And so I do think to the extent we can engage men in this conversation, while I know our focus today is the fact that more women left the workforce and have not returned, which is a concern. I think a lot of what we're talking about today is a shared awakening and a shared experience with a lot of men too.
I agree. And I have not seen outright discrimination against women or remote workers either. What I will say, and what I'm looking forward to seeing a change in, is I have seen that women take the remote work option more than men often, especially if they have a family at home. And sometimes being remote when a lot of other people are coming into the office can be a disadvantage in terms of FaceTime with your leaders, in terms of opportunities, in terms of getting to know your coworkers. And so I think there's definitely an effect on women or people who choose remote work. And I think employers and employees are going to have to find ways to get over that, get around it, and try to avoid that in the future.
All right, I think this is the last question since we're tight on time, but one person asked, as a recruiter, I've seen a lot of interest in a 4-day work week. What are your thoughts on this? And do you think it would be helpful for women in the workplace?
You want to take that, Allison?
Sure. I mean, we know there are places like Japan and other countries that are exploring 4-day work weeks. So this is not a crazy idea. For companies I've worked for, the exploration has been less about a 4-day work week. And I think it's been right in the conversations I've been privy to, where we talk about flexibility, but then sometimes you immediately go to, okay, well, we're just going to take Fridays off. Well, that's actually, I mean, that's pretty cool. 4-day work week is cool, but I don't know that that's really flexibility. And I don't know that that's really getting to what's each person's unique need. So I'm all for a 4-day work week. I think, interestingly enough, for office-based roles where we do a lot of work using technology and we've seen a lot of productivity improvements, I actually think most people can do their job 4 days a week. And I like to think about, okay, so what would we do on the 5th day? Where would we invest that time? Where would we invest our talent? And I think that's a really interesting conversation, but I don't know any companies that I've been connected to that are seriously considering a 4-day work week.
Yeah, I would second that. Most of the organizations that I am aware of that either have or promote 4-day work weeks, particularly in the HR space, you'd indicated you're a recruiter, are international organizations. I can think of quite a few, candidly. Not so much in the U.S. Not so much doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Do I think as a recruiter you could get your work done in 4 days successfully? Yes. I would also turn around and say, is that the right model for the flexibility? It may be, it may not be. And I think it is the thoughtful discussion with leaders and stakeholders around, again, the delivery of the work and then that necessitates the organization to continue to be successful, as well as making sure that it provides employees with a degree of flexibility. There may be some people who prefer to work, shorter days or come in later, right? If that means they can pick their kids up from school or drop them off at school versus just being off one day a week. And so that's when I think about flexibility, I think about it from a number of different veins and perspectives in terms of how does that show up for you? And so if having a day off once a week is important, I think that's great. I think flexibility looks different for different people. And the conversation is considering all of those options and tools for their highly valued, talented folks in these organizations.
Well, I think that's the last of our questions. I want to thank everyone for attending. Most of all, I want to thank Allison Joyce and Sakita Douglas. This was really a brilliant conversation. I loved everything about it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone else, the next in our series, we will be putting out and informing you. We look forward to seeing you again. And thank you everyone for the great conversation in the chat amongst our panel and everyone here. Thank you very much. Have a good day.